This is a real pleasure for me this afternoon because of a very different talk and a very different speaker. And I am thrilled to see the young ladies in the audience who have come, who may or may not be swimmers or athletes, but it is so important for you to hear what Riley has gone through. Riley Gaines is a nationally recognized champion in defending women's rights. She's a leader in defending women's single-sex spaces, advocating for equality and fairness, and standing up for women's safety, privacy, and, of course, equal opportunities. A graduate of the University of Kentucky, where she became a 12-time All-American swimmer, Riley tied UPenn's Leah Thomas, a genetic male swimmer, on the Penn women's team at the 2022 NCAA Division I Women's Swimming and Diving Championships. After her direct experiences competing against a genetic male in women's sports, being forced without warning or consent, as you will hear, to undress before a fully intact male, and being subjected to discrimination by the NCAA, does that sound familiar? Blaming the person who was attacked? Where did we hear this before? And Riley became one of the most powerful voices to speak out against radical gender ideology, robbing young women of opportunities, and stand up for the truth and, of course, common sense. She's challenging the rules of the NCAA, USA Swimming, International Olympic Committee, and other governing bodies. And Riley now serves as an ambassador for Independent Women's Voice, the host of the podcast Gaines for Girls, and director of the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute is a conservative organization that's been around for 40 plus years. And what they do, they train conservative leaders, very much like Riley, with the concept that the more leaders like that, the better off we will all be in learning from them. Riley and her team of ambassadors are spearheading a growing nationwide movement to defend women, common sense, and free speech. Let's give just a moment for the last two folks to sit down. I'm so happy at the size of this crowd. It's really wonderful to have you all here. Will you please join me in welcoming an incredible young woman, Riley Gaines. And she's got a hell of a handshake.
Well, that's because I have a dad who raised me right. So let me tell you, I could not be more grateful to be here. I had the pleasure of talking and spending some time with Dr. Altman yesterday. Really just remarkable. And again, you never know how you're going to be received, especially coming to somewhere like Aspen. It was kind of funny hearing the sneers and the chuckles when he's saying, you know, we don't get to hear from people like Riley too often. It's like, oh yeah, we know. So really, it's a blessing to be here and really so well received, especially by young girls. He said he couldn't tell if you guys were swimmers. I can, because I see the wet hair. So I know you guys are swimmers because I have been there, and it makes me very, very excited to see you guys. Certainly feel more welcomed and encouraged in this room than I did even testifying before Congress recently. I have had the opportunity, really I'll call it the misfortune, because it is. It's a misfortune that a 23-year-old, just recently turned 24, but 23 years old at the time, recent college graduate, college swimmer at that, has to go to DC to sit in front of Congress the beating heart of the American Republic and explain to them that men and women are different. And then to be on the other side of this table and watch as they have these super confused looks on their faces. But recently, I was there urging the Biden administration to halt with their illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX, which, if you've been paying attention, you now know they clearly did not listen to my pleas. But it was the Oversight and Accountability, one of the subcommittees, and so I'm one of 5 witnesses. And the ranking member of this subcommittee, Representative Lee, Summer Lee, she's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, she starts to read her opening monologue to the hearing. And the first words that come out of her mouth, she says, "I can't believe that I'm forced to sit here and listen to her transphobic bigotry." Yeah, that was my response too. My heart broke, really. I didn't feel mad, I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel frustrated. No, I felt entirely demoralized, disheartened. Again, a sitting member of Congress. No, she doesn't try to dissuade from my very reasonable, logical stance with common sense or fact or lived experience or science, what happened to follow the science. No, instead tries to, or resorts to name calling. And so it's my turn to read my testimony, and I read it, and I finish it, and I didn't even mean to say the last sentence. It accidentally just came out of my mouth. But I looked at her, and I said, "Representative Lee, if my opening testimony makes me transphobic, then understand, by your own logic, your opening monologue makes you a misogynist," which sent the hearing into the tailspin. That is not the response that she had. Of course, her counsel comes running over, her staff comes running over. I literally think she had never accurately heard the word misogynist used in a sentence. They're pulling up their phones. I think they looked up the definition, because about 60 seconds later, she raises her hand and she says, "I want her words removed from the record on the grounds of engaging in personalities," which Marjorie Taylor Greene was in that hearing, and so she buzzes in. And she says, "I would call a man posing as a woman someone who's engaging in personalities." And then it's like the Jerry Springer show. I'm like, oh gosh, what have I done? People are like jumping over tables. But nonetheless, let it be known, congressional record still stands. There were no grounds to have my words removed. And actually, someone just sent me her Wikipedia page not too long ago. And at the very bottom of it, it says, "As of whatever day she is a misogynist," which I think is hilarious. So I could explain and describe hundreds of seemingly comical scenarios, adverse situations that I have found myself in over these past 2 years or so. But again, just to reiterate how glad I am to be here in this room with you guys. But a little bit about me. I graduated from University of Kentucky in 2022, where I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. I was in dental school after college, what I was set to specialize in is endodontics, which is root canals, weirdly enough. I had married my husband in my senior year of college, the really cute 6'4" British guy who has this awesome, now living in Nashville, like this awesome country British accent. It rocks. It would have been really easy for me, really safe, really secure for me to essentially ride off into the sunset with the plans that I had made for myself. But I realized that the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans for yourself, because he very clearly had different plans for me. A little bit about my swimming. Started swimming when I was 4 years old, graduated when I was 22, dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport, which I don't have to explain this to you guys. I don't have to explain this to the swimmers who showed up with wet hair, to the parents of athletes, to grandparents of athletes, to some of you former athletes. You know what this is like. You know the time, you know the hours, the dedication, the sacrifices that you have to make to compete at and ultimately be successful at the highest level. I was no different, right? You don't get to go to prom. You don't get to have sleepovers with your friends on Friday night because guess what? You have practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. You don't get to go on family vacation to Aspen to go skiing. Unfortunately, I was denied that my whole life, but I'm here now. But you don't get to do those things. But I was willing. I knew that's what it took. Very fortunate to be able to receive a scholarship. I'm sorry, I'm biased. The SEC is the best conference. I knew I was going to stay in the SEC. Yeah. A lot more claps than I thought. I saw a Vanderbilt hat. I talked to someone who graduated from Kentucky, so I like it here. But I knew that's what I was going to do. My dad, he is an SEC Hall of Famer. He played football. My mom, she played softball. My oldest sister, she played softball. She went to Ole Miss. My brother, he's in college playing football now. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Very fortunate to receive a full ride to University of Kentucky, which there really could not have been a better place for me. I'll kind of flash forward here. Oh, let me just very briefly say, I very proudly finished my career as a 12-time NCAA All-American, a 5-time SEC champion, actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time, 2-time Olympic volleyball player, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year, but again, just to reinforce lifelong journey. Flash forward here. We dealt with COVID in my collegiate career, which was miserable, to say the least. Being a college athlete, I would say being a college student, really being a human during that time, right, in terms of the social distancing and the contact tracing and the mandatory vaccines and the mandatory mask, which how many of you have seen a swimmer in the water wearing a mask? No, but they certainly tried. We essentially waterboarded ourselves every day. Dealing with that was less than enjoyable. And we were robbed of an NCAA championships my sophomore year. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, our coaches pull us out of the water again, March of 2020, take us back to the team room. This is the meet you prepare not just all year, all your life for, the pinnacle of our sport. 3 days before we're supposed to go, our coaches sit us down and say, hey, the meet has been canceled, school is canceled, you're all being sent home. This was a shock, naturally. Swimming is not a sport where you get time off, you don't get to go home. We were there all summer, all Christmas, all Thanksgiving. We got 1 week off in August each year, that's it. So being told we got to go home mid-March, at first, honestly, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I get to go be with my family, but that excitement lasted all of 24 hours before we realized what this really meant. Because there were no pools open upon going back home to Tennessee. There were no gyms open, nothing like that. Nowhere where we could keep improving, which is vital in our sport. And so I put on a wetsuit every single day, jumped in the lake and swam miles aimlessly, just hoping and praying that I could maintain my skill set and my speed and my technique. So when we were eventually able to come back, I could continue this upward trajectory that I was on. And let me tell you, the amount of snakes that like swim in front of you, or like dead catfish that are floating on top of the water that hit you in your face while you're swimming, again, not pleasant. But I knew I had to do that. If I wanted to come back my junior year and continue on, which I did, to be honest with you. Junior year, this is when I won my first individual SEC title. This is when University of Kentucky won its first ever SEC title as a team in program history. And ultimately, my junior year, I concluded my season by placing 7th in the country, which I was proud of. To be top 8, you're an All-American, it's a pretty high honor. I didn't go my best time, which was a bummer for me. I knew I was capable of more. And so it was really right then and there that I placed 7th my junior year, that I set a goal for my senior year to win a national title, which would of course mean becoming the fastest woman in the country in my respective event. And so, senior year rolls around. You might be clapping too soon. Senior year rolls around, and I'm right on pace to achieve this goal. About midway through my senior season, I was ranked 3rd in the nation, trailing the girl in 2nd by merely a few 100ths of a second. A girl I knew very well, because like in most sports, your top tier athletes know of each other, regardless of where you compete, because we'd grown up competing against each other. So I knew her very well. But the swimmer who was leading the nation, by body lengths, might I add, was a swimmer that none of us had ever heard of before. Not me, not my teammates, not my coaches, not my family, none of us. And this is the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. Lots of red flags at the time. I'm looking up the name Leah Thomas. Again, I hadn't seen a photo of this person. There was no indicator to me that this would have been anything other than a female. But I saw this person as a threat to me winning a national title in a few months when that NCAA championships would roll around. And so I'm looking up this name. There's no history of this person until that season. None of it made sense. This was a senior from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that has ever historically produced that level of swimmer. And now I would argue they don't really produce a whole lot of good, now do they? As made very clear after events in October. A senior from UPenn, leading the nation by body lengths in events ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is of course a sprint, all of the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is of course long distance. And for those of you who might not necessarily understand swimming, think about that last piece in terms of your Olympic runners. That's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. It doesn't happen. Those are two totally different systems, but again, that's what we were seeing in this person. And so I'm scratching my head, I'm talking to my coaches, who is this? We have no idea, and we continued to stay in the dark until an article came out, very briefly disclosing in a blip of a sentence, word for word, it says, Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at UPenn before deciding to switch to the women's team. And so when I read this, of course I was shocked. I imagine I had the same reaction that you guys have right now. Of course we were shocked. But really upon reading it, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. Like, oh, duh, that makes sense, he's a man. There's no way he'll be able to compete with us at our national championships come March. Because surely the NCAA will see this how I see it, how my family sees it, how my teammates see it, how my coaches see it, how anyone with any amount of brain activity would probably comprehend this. But lo and behold, the NCAA did not. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with this, despite the fact that Thomas, the year prior, competing in the men's category, ranked 564th at best in his rightful division. To again, now not just number one, I mean dominating the entire country of women. It was about 3 weeks actually before our national championships when the NCAA released this statement, and it said Thomas's participation in the women's category was non-negotiable, meaning there was nothing that we could do. There were no questions that we could ask as female athletes. There were no concerns that we could raise. We were quite literally told we had to accept this with a smile on our face. And so I got to personally witness and really feel the effect that this infringement, or what I would call an injustice, had on myself and my teammates and my competitors. I don't claim to speak for every single girl on that pool deck. No, of course not. But I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of us, because I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw, not just from the moms in the stands watching as their daughters are being obliterated in the sport that they once loved, but the tears from the girls who placed 9th and 17th and missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around, fully undressed, and there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact, fully exposing himself, fully naked, inches away from where you were simultaneously, again, fully undressed. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the whispers, because that's what they were. They were whispers of anger and frustration from those girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to that meet. And so that first day was the 500 freestyle, which is not an event that I typically do. And so I watched on the side of the pool as Thomas swam to a national title, to quite literally no one's surprise. Again, beating out Olympians, beating out American record holders. Keep in mind, these aren't scrubs. They're the most impressive and accomplished female swimmers this world has ever seen. Many who are competing in the Olympics in just a few weeks. And again, he beat them all by body lengths. He became the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's title. Yeah, trailblazer. But the next day of competition was the 200 freestyle, which is the event that he and I race each other in. And so, of course, we get on the blocks, we dive off, we swim 8 laps of freestyle, touch the ball at the end, and almost impossibly enough, I look up at the scoreboard, and we had gone the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, meaning, of course, we had just tied, which is, number one, it's incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man. He couldn't even beat me. But 2, it's rare, right? You're racing for a minute and 40-ish seconds and not even 1/100th separated us. You can't tell me that's not divine intervention. But nonetheless, we get out of the water, we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Again, Thomas towering over me, and he says, "Great job, you two. But you tied, and we only have 1 trophy. So we're gonna give the trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one." Let me tell you, my heart rate was still high, having just raced. My adrenaline was still pumping, and so the first thing that I thought, ended up being the first thing that I said, and the first thought that I had was, isn't this everything that Title IX was passed to prevent from happening? What do you mean you're going to give the trophy to the man in the women's 200 free? To which he didn't have an answer. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asked why, and so he's kind of stumbling on his words, and he's, we're just doing this in chronological order. That was what he said at first. And so I said, okay, do you mean alphabetical? Because G comes before T. Otherwise, what are you being chronological about? We literally tied. To which, again, he didn't have an answer. But it was at this point when it was obvious by the way his face changed, by the way his voice changed. He looked sad. I could tell this official didn't even believe what he was about to say, but I appreciate his honesty because he looked at me and he said, "Riley, I am so sorry, but we have been advised as an organization, as the NCAA, that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands. Again, you can pose with this one, but you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home. You don't get one. You go home empty-handed, end of story." And let me tell you what, that was the moment when, for me, of course, all season, we knew the unfair competition was wrong. We knew the locker room scene was wrong. We knew the silencing that we were facing from our universities. We knew all of that was wrong. But it wasn't until this official reduced everything that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man at the expense of our own. That's when I was no longer willing to wait. And I say wait because truthfully, that's what I was doing. Call it cowering. I think it was more so me being naive. I was naive to the fact that I thought someone would do the right thing unprovoked. I really thought that, and oh my gosh, was I wrong. And I have continued to be proven wrong time and time again. I thought, surely there will be a coach who says something. Surely there will be someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, someone's dad, quite frankly, would come down there and yank this man out of our locker rooms like my dad so desperately wanted to do. I guess I thought someone who was supposed to be protecting us would protect us. But it was in that moment, standing on the podium, sharing my placement with a guy towering over me, holding this trophy I know I have to give back, and it hit me. I remember distinctly this realization of, oh my goodness, Riley, how in the world could you expect someone to stand up for you if you aren't even willing to stand up for you? This has to come from you as a woman, as a female athlete. And so again, the unfair competition side of things on top of the locker room, which, to be very brief and PG here, I can't even put into words, okay? first of all, if you're a swimmer or a parent of a swimmer, you know what putting on these racing suits is like. They're skin tight, they're paper thin. It takes about 20 minutes at least to really poke and prod yourself into these suits, 20 minutes of which you're fully exposed, a very vulnerable space. But growing up a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment. I can't even tell you how that vulnerability was stripped. And again, put yourself, better yet, put your daughters or granddaughters in our shoes, right? You're putting on your suit, you have your back turned, all of a sudden you hear a man's voice in that locker room. And you turn around and you quite literally have to look up because again, he's towering over everyone else. And you see a man taking off his women's swimsuit fully naked, fully intact. I guess exposing himself in all of his glory or really lack thereof. Of course, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. It was innate for every girl in that changing space to cover themselves, whether it was with their hands or their towels or their clothes, and to get out of the locker room as quickly as they could. I think the best way to describe how we felt, again, the general consensus of how we all felt, it felt like, of course it was an utter violation. It felt like betrayal. And it was traumatic. And not even necessarily traumatic because of what we were forced to see or how we were forcibly and non-consensually exploited. But it was traumatic for me to know just how easy it was for those people who created these policies and enforced these policies to totally dismiss our rights to privacy without even a second thought, without even bare minimum forewarning us that we would be sharing this changing space. And so again, that, I briefly alluded to the silencing as well, but I think an important piece of the pie here and understanding how this topic, a lot of the cultural chaos, the cultural issues that are plaguing this country, they've transcended beyond just the subject matter here. And it really has become an infringement on our First Amendment rights, on our freedom of speech specifically. I was told at my university, I had to go to mandatory sensitivity training. Didn't really work, but they brought in an outside professional, whatever that means. Again, me, a 21-year-old senior in college. They brought in an outside professional, sat me down. She taught me how to use the words she and her in a sentence. If I didn't complete the training to her standard, I had to re-go through the training. So you bet your bottom dollar, I had to re-go through that training. I was told you'll never get a job. They said, Riley, your employer is going to look you up if you speak up about this. And they're going to see that you're a transphobe. And they'll never hire you. You don't want that. Riley, don't you want to be a dentist? No dental school will ever accept you if you speak up about this. They said you'll lose your friends, you'll lose your scholarship. Oh yeah, Riley, speaking of that scholarship, remember you signed that. And when you signed that, you gave away your rights to speak in your own personal capacity. Remember who you represent. They said, remember whose name is across your chest and across your cap, because it's not yours, it's ours. And understand, we have already taken your stance for you. That's what they told us. That's the emotional blackmail, the gaslighting that we went through. Not to mention what Thomas's teammates went through. They had to go to weekly mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. 16 of these girls signed on to an email at the beginning of the season to their administration expressing their discomfort, specifically in the locker room. Many of these girls actually being survivors of some form of sexual abuse, sexual assault. Signed on to an email. I kid you not, I have the response from their university, from UPenn. They responded back and said, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves. Counseling resources provided by none other than the Campus LGBTQ Education Center. They even went as far to tell these girls that if they did speak up and any harm whatsoever were to come towards Thomas's way, whether it was physical, whether it was emotional harm, self-inflicted for that matter, they said, then understand you are solely responsible. And that would make you responsible for a potential death, and that would make you a murderer. And you don't want to be a murderer, do you? They said, you don't want to have blood on your hands. No, so I suggest you be kind, and I suggest you be inclusive. That's what these universities were telling girls like me, girls like your daughters. That's what they were saying. Again, let that really sink in. They told these girls that if they advocated for fair play, the bare minimum, fair play and privacy in areas of undressing, they would have blood on their hands. Believe it or not, that's effective when you're talking to 18, 19, 20-year-old girls. It works. In short, believe it or not, that's the in short version. That's how I got here. But more importantly than how is why, right? Why is this happening? Why do I so fiercely and so passionately want to defend this topic? Let's be very clear. This is so much broader than me not being able to hold the $5 production trophy on the podium. This is so much broader than that. This is so much bigger than just women's sports. Again, the premise of this debate, of the gender ideology movement as a whole, is that we're denying objective truth. We're denying biblical truth, and we're denying objective truth, biological reality, a reality that we have never struggled to understand in the nearly 250 years we've been established as a country, and certainly much longer than that. That truth, the most basic of them being man and woman. There are no limits. Understand that. There are no limits when we have seemingly an entire political party, at least in terms of elected representation, who believes man and woman are the same. It's synonymous, it's interchangeable. Men can become women, women can become men. Their credibility has been compromised entirely on every single topic. I will not believe a word that comes out of your mouth on anything if you genuinely look at me in my face and tell me that a man can become pregnant. I don't believe a word you say about anything. But again, that's what we're being asked. No, that's what we're being told. That's what we are being told to say. It's equivalent to 2 + 2 is 5. And if you've read 1984, which don't lie and say you read it out of your own free will, we all had to read it for school, you know the outcome. And it's not pretty. It's a slippery slope that by the hands and feet of our own leaders in the state, leaders at the local level, the administration in the White House right now, a slippery slope that we are actively being led down. Which all sounds grim. It sounds very chilling. And yeah, maybe from a worldly perspective, sure. But from an eternal perspective, I have all the reassurance that I need because I understand that the battle has already been won, which is why I'm able to do what I do with a smile on my face and an incredibly light heart. But I will say, I feel more hopeful right now than I have felt at any point over these past 2 years. Now 24 states, hopefully it will become 25 just this week. 24 states have passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill, ultimately ruling that you must compete in the category that aligns with your biological sex. There's a bill on Governor Sununu's desk in New Hampshire. He has said he will sign it. We'll see. Colorado is not one of those states, but not because you don't have wonderful people fighting for you down at the state capitol. You do. Brandy Bradley, she's amazing. Representative Holtorf, another one who has been fierce in advocating for women, for sanity, really, for common sense. And so you do have good representation, but it's an uphill battle for them. There are now 8 states that have codified and defined the word woman in law. I can't even believe we have to do that. But we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who can't even answer the question of what is a woman because she claims she's not a biologist, which, guess what? I'm not a veterinarian, but I know what a dog is. That's the simplest thing I've ever heard. And it's no surprise that this is the same Supreme Court justice who a few weeks ago in an interview, she said she felt like our First Amendment rights were hamstringing the government. Precisely. That is precisely what they're supposed to do. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. And if our government can't understand or abide by that, that's precisely why we have the Second Amendment. So no surprise there. But anyways, 8 states have defined this word woman in law, which is not only necessary, I would argue that it's urgent when you have states like Colorado who quite literally are actively doing the opposite, changing the word female in your state legislature and your state statute. It's no longer female or woman or mother or girl. No, it's now like cervix haver or uterus owner or menstruator or bleeder or chest feeder or birthing person, birth giver, egg producer. That's what your state thinks of you and your daughters. They have reduced you down to your biological functions and capacities. And they say that you exist solely to validate the thoughts in a man's head. Again, that really sink in. We mentioned Title IX several times. I'm sure many of you in this room had the opportunity of benefiting from Title IX, right? The federal civil rights law that prevents sex-based discrimination on any educational program that receives federal funding. Again, we have an administration in the White House who has actively rewritten Title IX, changed its purpose entirely, actually abolished its original intent. They took this 37 words, enacted in 1972, created a new proposal that's now almost 500,000 words, 1,577 pages long from a brief paragraph. That should tell you everything that you need to know, but in short, equating sex with gender identity. Meaning, men have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces, not just on college campuses, but at your local YMCA, your local Young Men's Christian Association. Men can take academic and athletic scholarships for women. Men can join sororities, which is already happening. Men have full access to dorm rooms, to be housed in dorm rooms with your daughters. Your speech would be compelled. You would be forced, under this new rewrite, to refer to someone who identifies as trans with their preferred pronouns or their biologically incorrect pronouns. And if you don't, you would be guilty and charged with sexual harassment. No, not the man parading around your daughter's locker room. No to President Biden, that's considered brave. He said it many times. He says, these are the most brave and inspiring people I've ever met. But you calling a spade is grounds for sexual harassment. But we have seen now 26 states suing the Biden administration and the Department of Education for this illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX. We have seen a preliminary injunction issued in 14 of these states, which is great news. So anyways, all that to say, I really and truly, we wouldn't have seen these same 26 states suing 2 years ago. I feel more hopeful now than I have at any point. There will be a big vote in Congress tomorrow. Representative Mary Miller has introduced a Congressional Review Act, again, combating Joe Biden's illegal rewrite of Title IX. I encourage you to watch how your representative is voting. And if it's anything like the vote went today on the SAVE Act, which fell entirely, almost, 5 Democrats, almost entirely on party lines, I imagine that's how tomorrow will go, but pay attention. They're putting themselves on public record, declaring that they don't think women are worthy of equal opportunity, privacy, or safety. Let it be very clear. They say they're the party of and for women. They are not. Do not let them lie to you like that anymore. Call out the hypocrisy. Anyways, I could keep going for forever. I think I've well extended my time, but I'm very excited to get into some questions with Dr. Altman. So thank you.
Is she incredible? We're just going to have a little interview first, so please stick around. We will then open the floor to questions, and I have quite a few. The first is just a remark. And who's a threat to democracy? Forget that. Okay, so recently, the Court for Arbitration of Sport dismissed Thomas's request for arbitration with World Aquatics. World Aquatics, which is the governing body for swimmers, declared that they essentially banned transgender swimmers from competing in female events. And they also created an open category for transgender athletes. Doesn't that make goddamn sense? Anyway, tell me what your thoughts are. She was just told she is unable to compete in the Olympics as well. The NAIA, which is the NCAA of smaller schools, also ruled against transgender swimmers in transgender women swimming against women. In medicine, in gynecology, we call that an MTF, a male to female transsexual. Otherwise, it would be FTM, female to male. So some of us, even I, get confused when you are talking depending on her pronouns. But the point is that the NAIA has removed this capability, which is excellent for women and for women athletes. I need to read you something about the NCAA, because the NCAA has not done this yet. At a time when the NCAA faces backlash for suppressing women's achievements, the president of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, a guy named Charlie Baker, made a blockbuster admission buried on page 18 of a recent letter to the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'm going to quote this. The NCAA has never studied the harm of its policy allowing males identifying as women to participate and compete on women's teams. Not ever. What are these people thinking? Can you please comment on this and tell us about your experiences beyond what you just told us about the NCAA, the way they've treated you and their thinking?
Yes, I'll start with the court ruling. As said, after this national championships, FINA and World Aquatics, they moved pretty swiftly. They were really the first international governing body that took a bold first step in prioritizing fairness over inclusion. Their policy still is not perfect. The policy says if you've gone through male puberty, you can't compete in the women's category. It insinuates if you've transitioned by the age of 12 that you can, which I think is criminal to even suggest. But again, a bold first step, the first ones to really do it. Created an open category, but this ruling, it banned Thomas or any male who, again, hasn't transitioned by the age of 12 from competing in the women's category at elite level competitions, including the Olympics. But this was not satisfactory to Thomas, a third category. He said if he can't trample on women in the process, he doesn't want to compete at all. And so he ultimately ended up suing for a spot on the U.S. women's Olympic team, to which maybe 3-4 weeks ago, a month ago maybe, the courts finally came back and they said that he has no standing for this case and he can compete in the Olympics on the men's side, which he never ever would be able to. So it's wild to me that we've reached a point in society, this weird blip in time where we applaud a court ruling that. It's essentially as if we're applauding a judge ruling that the sun sets in the west. But nonetheless, it's a victory. It's a victory for women and girls. It's a victory for humanity. And we celebrate those wins for sure. Speaking specifically to the NCAA, what's the best way to put this? The NCAA is filled with weak-kneed, morally bankrupt, spineless cowards, okay? Probably the best way to put it. The president at the time, who stepped down after this, I think this was a large part in why he stepped down, Mark Emmert, he publicly released a statement in the days following the national outrage after this national championships. And in this statement, he said word for word, again quoting, I unequivocally stand in my decision to allow Leah Thomas to swim with the women because it's backed with evolving science, is what he said. But then privately, I see him at this big conference, this big awards banquet where they were honoring the NCAA Woman of the Year, the most prestigious honor for collegiate female athletes. Each university gets one nominee. University of Kentucky chose me. I was so honored by this until I saw a full list of nominees. An NCAA Woman of the Year was not exclusive to just women, because Leah Thomas was who University of Pennsylvania nominated as their Woman of the Year. Anyways, I see Mark Emmert at this big conference, and we make eye contact, and he's probably like, no, and I'm like, there's no way you're escaping me. And so I go up to him, and he says, he has the audacity to say to me, keep going. Keep fighting, keep pushing, as if he's not the one that I'm fighting. But again, it shows you their true cowardice. And what I've seen in talking, going up the line here, up the chain of command, every single person, they say our hands are tied. Our hands are tied. Well, who's tying your hands? You're the president. What do you mean your hands are tied? So again, they're cowards, which we saw. We saw the NAIA, again, a smaller national, but nonetheless a national collegiate governing body. They ruled 25-0 that they would not allow people who were born of the opposite sex to compete in a category that did not align with their sex. 25-0. So I think, what I truly think, I think the NCAA is thrilled that states are passing laws. I think the NCAA is thrilled that myself and now 15 other athletes are suing them because it gives them an out. I think they want to do the right thing, but again, terrified cowards.
Speaking of freedom of speech, I think many of you understand what happens in large universities, even small colleges now, if students don't particularly agree with something you're saying. You either get disinvited or you get violated verbally. But I want Riley to tell you about her very, very special experience at San Francisco State University, where she was invited to speak by a conservative student group. Please sit in your chairs because you're not going to believe this.
Yeah, probably just hearing the word San Francisco, you probably already know the outcome of this. But it's been a big push of mine, what we're doing at the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute, getting on college campuses, speaking to the younger demographic, really, I mean, just shedding light on what's going on, and again, how we're being co-opted, how this whole movement has hijacked reality. I think last semester we spoke on 25 different college campuses. One of those being San Francisco State University. I was naive to believe that the students there, community members, would come with an open mind and the willingness to have their hearts softened, because they did not. They came with pitchforks and fire. And upon delivering my message in a similar forum, right? It's the podium at the front. There's a classroom setting. Upon delivering my message, protesters, they rush in from the back, hundreds of them. They turn off the lights, they rush to the front of the room where I'm standing, and they ambush me. I'm being pushed, I'm being shoved, I'm being quite literally punched in the face by these men wearing dresses, which fortunately for me, their punches really don't hurt that bad. But these protesters, they ended up holding me for ransom throughout the middle of the night. For I think almost 5 hours, demanding that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. You might be wondering, okay, well, where are the police? Guys, it's San Francisco. The police were being held for ransom with me. So I'm looking at the officers, hour 2, hour 3 of being in this room. Can't you do something? To which they said, no, actually we can't. We're not allowed to do anything because we're not allowed to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community, or else we'll lose our jobs. The same community is on the other side of the door calling these officers racist pigs for protecting a white girl like me. Anyways, the dean of students, it's like midnight at this point, middle of the night. The dean of students shows up, starts negotiating with the students how much I owe each of them to leave, which the price they agreed upon was $10 each, which makes me mad because I think I'm worth more than $10. But anyways.
There was a movie like that once.
But eventually, was able to get out. 40 or so officers had to form a diamond around me. We pushed our way out. Anyways, but the next day, the vice president of student affairs at the university, her name is Dr. Jamila Moore, she sent out a university-wide email to the entire student body, to faculty, to professors, to everyone on campus. And in this email, she said, "We are so proud of our brave students for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. We know how deeply traumatic her presence is on this campus, and so here are some counseling resources for you guys. Take the day off of school," this email said. "Just know that we see you, we love you, we hear you, and we stand with you." Nowhere in this email did it say that we condemn violence against women for that matter. Nowhere in this email did it say that we uphold our First Amendment rights and the freedom of speech. No, of course not. And then actually just recently, the police department got back with me and said there was no evidence anywhere to charge anyone. This is coming from the same officer who was held in the room with me. He said, no evidence anywhere. They couldn't charge the individual students, they couldn't charge the university, they couldn't charge the police department for failing at their most basic duty in ensuring my safety. Which, not that you needed another example to show you how our justice system is two-tiered, but there you go if you did.
It's remarkable what this woman has been through. That's, I think, the only time you've been kidnapped, but it is not the only time you have been verbally abused and prevented from having some sort of freedom of speech. This hall is a synagogue, and 2 Saturdays ago, after worshiping during the service, we hold a Kiddush meal where people come and eat. And during that interlude of what you might call lunch, a woman who had worshiped here with us came up to me and said, "Dr. Altman, aren't you concerned about bringing Riley Gaines to speak here? Because I announced these programs at the end of the service." And I said, "No, why?" She said, "Well, you know, many people may be offended by what she's saying." And part of me wanted to say, anyone who is offended by what she says, that's that person's problem, not my problem. But I didn't say that. I said, "Well, why do you think someone would be offended?" "Well, she's a transphobe. She doesn't." I said, "Wait a minute. What she is going to be talking about is her experience as a female swimmer, swimming against genetic males. Why can't you understand that that's an issue and at least look to hear from her?" So my question to you, you transphobe, how do you respond to people like this? At least the ones who are willing to let you respond, as opposed to the ones screaming in your ears. How do you respond to people who call you transphobic?
It honestly has almost become a term of endearment at this point. And let me tell you, I've been called them all. Homophobic, transphobic, racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist, a fascist, a Nazi. They will call you literally everything to dissuade from what you're saying. They'll do everything under the sun except for actually engage in civil discourse. But how I respond is very simple, and this is the approach that I've had over these past 2 years. And this is what I go around, even speaking to legislative bodies at the state level, the federal level. I meet with Congress, I meet with the Senate all the time, and even help them understand how to talk about this. To be very, very clear, the stand that I have taken is not a stand that is against anything or against anyone. No, the stand that I have taken is a stand that is for something. And what I am standing for, I'm standing for transparency. I am standing for equal opportunity. I'm standing for privacy, for safety. I'm standing for maintaining our dignity as women. The stand that I have taken is not anti-trans, it is pro-woman. And it brings me to it is pro-parental rights. It is pro-safeguarding children. And that, in those brief moments, I mentioned testifying before Congress and that interaction I had with Representative Lee, Congresswoman Lee. In those brief moments where she spewed these names my way, I was thinking to myself, why is it that being pro-woman is immediately deemed anti-trans? I hadn't even had the opportunity to say a single word yet, and she already labeled me anti-trans. Why is it that that's the case? And okay, if that's the standard, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman? And what do we call someone who's anti-woman? We call them a misogynist, which is why I said by her own logic. I don't really think Representative, well, maybe I kind of do. Maybe I kind of do think she's a misogynist. But nonetheless, that was me to a degree stooping to her level to, not to throw an arrow back, but to call out the hypocrisy. And she didn't like it. She quite literally tried to erase history by having my words removed from the record. But anyways, the approach that I take, I mean, you heard it in my talk tonight. I really don't know what you could disagree with what I said. Again, it's very much based on what we experienced, our raw emotions, how we felt betrayed, how we felt violated, how we had the rug ripped out from under us, how we trained our entire lives just to have that overlooked in a split second by people who were supposed to be protecting us. We hear it all the time. I've heard it at the State House here. I've testified in Colorado many times. I got told I had no decorum testifying here. They cut me off. But they say, where is your compassion? They say, no, where is your empathy? Don't let them do that to you. Ask them, is it compassionate to ask a young girl to undress in front of a man? Is that what compassion is to you? And is it really inclusive to ask women, young girls, to smile and step aside and allow these men onto our podiums? Is that really what inclusion is? No, that is exclusion, and it's exclusive to the very women, the very female athletes who the women's sporting category was created to uphold and celebrate and protect. So I'm even testifying before the Senate, Senator Dick Durbin, he said that. He said, where's your compassion for trans youth? And I said, Senator Durbin, where is your compassion for women? To which he had no response.
Just very briefly, would you describe to us how this goes beyond women's athletics? This extends to prisons. It extends to women's homes where they are to be safe, potentially from being battered at their home, and they go to an institution type of place. It extends beyond just athletics.
Well beyond just athletics. And again, really only happening one way. We don't see men or women joining fraternities. No, but you know what we do see? We see men joining sororities. We've seen it over and over and over again. I think the case that garnered the most national attention is right over here at University of Wyoming, where they allowed the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, bypassed all of the voting, all of the regulations. I'll be honest, I don't know anything about sororities. We called ourselves our little swim team, which it felt like one because we were 40 girls and I was the captain of the team of 40 girls, and so we called ourselves Kappa Kappa Goggles. But, so I don't know what the protocol or the procedures really are, but bypassed every standard that women had to go through to get elected and chosen in the sorority. No, the boy didn't have to, he was just handpicked and allowed into this sorority. A 6'2", 260-pound man who now goes by the name of Artemis, who is terrorizing these girls. He walks around naked. Again, I'll be PG. I won't say the things that he said to these girls. The comments he's made about their undergarments or their bodies, how he showers in the showers, how he walks around the sorority house, again, fully naked. These girls were promised sisterhood, and they got the brother that they never wanted. Which this case, just made up, actually was down in Colorado at state capitol in Denver. This case was just brought before the 10th Circuit. I'm there listening to 3 federal judges, a Biden appointee, a Clinton appointee, an Obama appointee. It sounds like one of those like bar jokes. You walk into a bar. Okay, but no, that's the reality of what these girls were faced with. They sued, made it up to this level. Oh my gosh, listening to the Kappa attorney. She said, woman doesn't have a meaning. It can mean anything you want it to mean. To which actually, the Biden appointee looks at her and he says, okay, which this says a lot. He looks at her and he said, okay, well, if woman can quite literally mean anything, are you saying that it can mean cisgender men too? She said, well, I don't really have enough research to tell you if woman can mean man. I'm sitting there listening to this like, oh my gosh. Anyways, all 3 judges ruled not in the favor of these young girls. So again, shows you of where we are. Prisons, very briefly. It's tragic what these incarcerated women are going through. It's happening here. It's happening in New Jersey, Ohio, Kansas. I mean, you name it. California, which of course, California. In recent weeks in California, over 1,600 men have applied to be women to get into women's prisons. 1,600. These are men convicted of sexual crimes, of heinous, awful crimes. But they're getting into these women's prisons. Men who have AIDS and HIV because they've been in male facilities for so long. HIV is now running rampant in women's facilities in California because these men are raping these women and then impregnating these women. You know what they did on Super Bowl Sunday? These correctional officers worked overtime, so California taxpayer dollars are paying them to install condom dispensers in these all-women's facilities. That's what's happening. You know how many women applied to be in men's prisons, though? 1, and she had 3 months left of her sentence. So again, to say it's transcended beyond just sports, and again, contributes to the overall and systemic erasure of women would be an understatement.
Now, I just assume, because I'm kind of naive, that you have been getting support from all sorts of feminist and women's organizations. They must be behind you because this is so important to them. Tell me the truth.
You mean the same feminist organizations who were quick and swiftly released statements condemning the attacks on the women in Israel? You mean those same feminist groups?
Same group. The same ones who are absolutely silent about the treatment of women in Islamic countries. But we won't go there, but please comment.
I think we should go there. No. What we have seen from these groups who call themselves feminist groups, again, is betrayal. They're traitors to their own sex is what they are. You have groups like NOW, right, the National Organization of Women. These were the ones that wore the hats and burned the bras. These were really who fought for Title IX 52 years ago. This same group just released an article a couple weeks ago that called me a white supremacist patriarchist. I don't even know what that means. Thanks, I know, right? The National Women's Law Center, for example. This is a law center dedicated to fighting for and maintaining the rights of women. Testifying, again, another time in Congress, sat next to the president of the National Women's Law Center, who said in her opening testimony that women should just learn how to lose more gracefully to men. Is that not the most regressive and utterly misogynistic thing you have heard? People like Billie Jean King. I mean, this is the woman we have to accredit Title IX to. She played in the battle of the sexes and she won, and it was this huge feat for women, and it propagated women forward, not just in sport, but as a whole, in the workplace, within personal relationships. Billie Jean King is now actively fighting for male inclusion in women's sports and women's spaces. Megan Rapinoe, it's another one. She says her greatest achievement of all time in her remarkable athletic career, playing soccer, was achieving or fighting for equal pay for the women's U.S. national soccer team and compared to the men's U.S. national soccer team. Yet, she's a total virtue signaling sellout. You can be two things at once. She can be a remarkable athlete, which she definitely is, and she can be a traitor to her own sex, pulling up the ladder behind her, and that's what she's doing. But we do have good representation, again, down in D.C., people who are fighting for us. I will say my state senator, differing from y'all's state senators, my state senator, Marsha Blackburn, she has been steadfast in both fighting for Jewish women, for women in Islamic countries, making Democrats, again, unfortunately this has fallen almost entirely on party lines, making Democrats publicly attest to whether or not they condemn the terrorist group that is Hamas and how they have beheaded women, how they have raped women, how they have tortured women in Israel. She's been steadfast in that. She's been steadfast in fighting for women as a whole. So, not for lack of trying. There are some feminist groups who have been, I guess, true to their original intent, but few and far between.
Well, I would like to go to questions from the audience, but first, I want to ask you my last question, and I think most people, having just listened to you, will probably agree. And my question is, when and where are you going to run for office? First question, please make your questions a question, please. And of course, a man's going to ask it first.
In track and field, the UK miler, it seems to me, maybe even before your meet, led for track and field internationally a more sensible approach, as I recall. I'm forgetting his name, but everybody in the track world knows him. Did NCAA, how did they deal with the world track approach?
So this is a good question, and again, speaks to the cowardice of the NCAA. What they have done now, since 2010 up until 2022, so for 12 years they had a blanket policy in place that said it was a testosterone threshold. So if you can get your testosterone lower than, I believe it was 5 nanomoles per liter, which the average woman is the decimal amount of nanomoles per liter of testosterone, they said then you can compete with women, ultimately reducing women down to a testosterone level. But after, again, the national outrage, the pushback they got following the Leah Thomas debacle, the NCAA, they wanted all hands off deck. They wanted no responsibility. They wanted no accountability. They didn't want to be responsible for anything. And so what they did is basically say, hey, we're going to leave it up to each specific sport governing body can make their own rules for their own sport, and we'll follow what they say for their sport. So now groups like track and field, so for example, you mentioned World Athletics, that's the international governing body of all running, throwing, those types of events. They followed the footsteps of FINA and World Aquatics and said, if you've gone through male puberty, you can't compete in the women's category. And so now the NCAA, they're in a phase-out approach, but that's what they're working to adhere to. But again, it shows how they're cowards. Other sports like soccer, for example, aren't protected. Soccer, you can actually take performance-enhancing drugs as a woman and still be able to compete fairly with women. So some sports are protected, some sports are relatively protected, some aren't.
You've still got work to do. Wait one second, I gotta have a woman ask a question. Are you a woman?
I definitely am. Riley, I so appreciate you. I just have a question because this is kind of beyond sports, right? This blurred truth kind of oozing out everywhere. What can we do? Who do I call?
No, I love this, and definitely something I wanted to get to because action items are important. Again, what we can do as everyday people. People often think, I'm just one person, I can't do anything. That would be your first mistake in believing that. I thought that for a while, and now seeing the impact that has been had, merely the platform that's been developed, just as one person has been remarkable. So we do have the power. Number one, and I'll say this as a Christian myself, is trust God's calling for you, first and foremost. When He brings you to something, answer. It took a while, again, for me to understand that, to feel as if I was prepared. I thought to myself, God, I'm not someone who's prepared for this. I don't know anything about government. I know we have 3 branches. I don't know what they do. I still don't know what they do. I don't even think they know what they do. My public speaking courses in college, my face turned the color of a tomato. I was like, this is not for me. Give it to someone else. But I realized He equips you if He brings you to it. So trust His calling for you, number 1. Number 2, do not wait until you're directly impacted to take action, which again is exactly what I did. I waited until it negatively and personally affected me before I saw this as a worthwhile cause. Again, I thought someone else would do it. I thought it would be a one-time thing, swept under the rug. The NCAA would change their policies. We could move on. It wouldn't happen again. Again, I was wrong in assuming that. And then it impacted me. I saw the harm. I saw the severity. I saw that it was a worthwhile and urgent cause. But if each and every single one of us waited until we were directly impacted, it's far too late. Third, what we can do and what we need to see from parents. Oh my gosh, lots of fingers to point, right? You can point a finger at Joe Biden. You can point a finger at the NCAA or the IOC or what have you. But I believe there's a finger to be pointed at parents. I get parents who reach out to me all the time. They say, hey, this is happening to my daughter at this school. Is there something you can do? I would do something, but I can't lose my job. I work in corporate America. I can't risk that. And it blows my mind. It honestly breaks my heart, really. Do I have to care more about your daughter than you do? And so we need to see parents who are willing to defend their kids, who are willing to teach their kids how to be independent thinkers, teach their kids how to call out an injustice when they see it, teach their sons how to be strong men at that. So much of this conversation is around girls and women, but we need strong men too. And so we've seen, I believe, a failure on account of parents, and so we need to see parents who are willing to defend their kids. And again, always reaching out to your representative, your state senator, federal level, local level. Actually, more importantly than what's going on at a national level is knowing what's going on right here. At school boards, at these local elections where you think, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's a small position, the voting turnout isn't very big. It does matter. Again, I believe it matters far more than who's in the White House. It affects right here far more. So I would say do your research and adequately vote. Don't just vote for someone because they have an R by their name either, because as we've seen, oftentimes they can be our own worst enemy.
Part of the problem with parents is that they are being told by the leaders in school who are part of this indoctrination that if you oppose your daughter or your son doing this, there's a higher risk of their committing suicide. This has been shown to be totally untrue statistically. Secondly, another thing we can all do is the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute to support this center and the incredible work that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
I have a question here.
Riley, first I want to say it's an honor to have you at our synagogue. Thank you so much for being here. So here's my question. When you were attacked in San Francisco, you were standing alone. You were by yourself. There were all these people coming to the room, and you were standing alone. As a Jew, I often feel that we're standing alone also when we're attacked. Now, as you mentioned, the same groups, like these same supposedly feminist groups that aren't really feminist, are attacking us, and they're attacking you. Obviously, it's much bigger than them. It's a whole ideology. So you are standing alone, and we stand alone, but how do we stand together so that when any of us are attacked, we can all come together with a big group?
I think this is awesome. And definitely something that I've had my eyes open to. As we have said, almost every issue. I don't understand it. Almost every issue. I was actually at the State of the Union this past, this whenever it was, and I was so disheartened, again, because this is not supposed to be a divisive address. It's merely just the president addressing the state of our nation. But the whole time, I'll tell you, this was the only time I've ever been glad that Joe Biden is president, because I didn't have to keep standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down. I got to sit the whole time. But every topic, it was like the Democrats stood up and they stood back down. It was so divisive, it was crazy. So all that to say, seemingly every single issue, especially the cultural ones, have fallen almost entirely on party lines. At least in terms of elected representation and how the media portrays these issues. But what I have seen in talking to people is that's not reality. That's not, the way these elected officials are voting, Democrats are voting, that's not representative of society. Every poll shows it, at least in terms, I don't know the numbers specifically as to the issue that has impacted your community, but on the women's sports stuff, nationally, over 75% of Americans, your everyday Americans, agree that men should not be competing in women's sports. But that's not what you would think if you just saw this on the news. So having the conversations, I found there's a lot more allies than we realize. And what I think we need to do, what we need to see, is people linking arms, regardless of any identity factor, regardless of old versus young, white versus black, gay versus straight, regardless of any identity factor. And that's what I've seen. People like Martina Navratilova, who is a phenomenal, of course, she's the greatest of all time tennis player, won 1,000 bajillion, whatever they're called, I don't know tennis that well, Grand Slams. She's amazing. We don't agree on literally anything at all, except for this topic, and the topic of maintaining women's rights as it pertains to equal opportunity, privacy, and safety. And she's become a dear friend. And I look at her and we can disagree on the other things, but she's still someone who I admire, quite frankly, which again is something we've strayed really far from as a society, as civil discourse, engaging in conversation, listening to one another, being willing to think for ourselves, admitting when we're wrong, something I certainly have a problem with. It's because I'm never wrong, right, Louis? He says yes, dear.
Good question. I was hoping to seek a little clarification. If you could speak towards your concerns about transgender females competing in women's sports who have already or who have not undergone male puberty, with the idea being that they would not have the same physical advantage as biological males who have.
Well, the thing is, women aren't merely just men who have physically altered themselves. That's not what women are. And so I don't believe there's any scenario where it is fair or ethical or just to allow men to compete in women's sports, especially if it's a sport where you're colliding with one another, what have you. But for example, in mentioning testosterone and how that it certainly does affect puberty, and it increases, your muscular structure, it increases fast twitch muscles, things like that. But other things that I don't know if people understand, things that aren't impacted by puberty or by testosterone. For example, men on average have a 40% larger throat than women, which is a huge advantage in the sport of swimming, for example. When you're grasping for air, a 40% larger airway is a large contributing factor to success. Heart size, lung size of your feet and of your limbs. These are things that don't change with testosterone.
And most of these changes occur in utero.
That's right.
Okay? That's where the changes begin.
So you're saying still like 9-year-old boys or girls, you're still going to see these boys, these biological boys, competing at a different level than these biological females?
Well, it certainly increases after puberty, and again, attesting to my own personal experience in the sport of swimming. 11, 12 years old, it's very comparable. Oftentimes, I would beat the boys would beat me, but when we came back, I remember because I'm the most competitive person to quite literally ever exist. We can't even play card games. Come back 13, 14, and these boys who I could once at some point keep up with towered over me. They demolished me. But even still, look, this isn't me saying that I don't believe co-ed teams, or I don't believe there's benefit to co-ed teams. Of course I do. But what I'm advocating for here is transparency. So I think when you're younger, playing in little league teams, what have you, I don't see the harm. If that's what you're advertised as a team that accepts both boys and girls, by all means, I think it's a beautiful thing. But if you're advertised as only girls or only women, for maintaining transparency and again, safety and fairness, I believe it's important to uphold that.
Final question here from this lovely young lady.
Hi. Will you ever swim competitively again?
Well, let me tell you, I'm so glad that you're here. Like I said, it makes me just thrilled. I feel revitalized, truly, seeing young girls especially. Will I ever swim competitively again? I'll tell you what I'm doing tomorrow. I am going back to San Francisco. I'm crazy. I'm going back to San Francisco, and I am actually swimming Alcatraz. So I still love competing. It's really hard when you compete, like I said, your entire life, something I know you're used to. You practice, you train, you compete, and then it ends. It's a very hard time for me, period, to get used to not having a coach telling you what to do every day, not having a nutritionist, not having that sort of steady routine and schedule. And so to be honest, I struggled for a bit, kind of finding my purpose outside of swimming. You put so much of your identity in your sport. So I got into running, I got into triathlons, which I still do. So I still love swimming. I feel like a lot of times people who swim can end on a pretty bitter note, because it's a grueling sport. We practice at the collegiate level 6 hours every single day, 15,000 yards every single day, which is equivalent to about 10 miles every single day, staring at the same black line at the bottom of the pool, starving yourself of oxygen, not being able to talk with your friends next to you. It's pretty grueling. So a lot of people, when they finish, they don't want to compete anymore, they're done. But I loved it. I never lost that love for my sport. And so I don't know about in terms of course, I don't think the Olympic level or anything like that, but master swimming or something like that, I think I could see myself doing that, just because I enjoy it, and I enjoy fitness and staying fit and winning more than anything. Actually, I just hate losing. More than I love winning, I hate losing. So I think I'll swim some more. What's your best event?
I think I can listen to you all day. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley Gaines.